Hey everyone, thanks
Hello.
for joining in. We have Lyla with us from Google for an hour, and she will be answering questions about what it's like to work at Google and her role there and her roles previously, and we are super excited to have her. She probably looks like a very familiar face to those in our Android
Well, my hair
track.
is completely different. I always try to, throw people off with completely different hairstyles.
I said face, so.
Yeah.
So the way to work is I'll be moderating and just I'll be asking some questions, sharing some questions with Lyla that you pre-submitted, and then we'll be doing that for 15 minutes. And then after those 15 minutes are done, we'll be taking live questions for 15 minutes. Then another 15 minutes of pre-selected questions, then another 15 minutes of live questions, just to keep you on your toes.
So you figure if you don't get your live questions in at the halfway point, you can wait around until the end and keep asking them.
Yes, exactly. This will be all about your questions, though. So I think I'll just have you take it from there.
Sure. Okay. Well, as Kelsey said, my name is Lyla. I'm currently a developer advocate at Android, and I can get into a little bit more about what that means. But I also worked for a few years as a course developer on the Android team at Udacity. And before that, I was in the Peace Corps. So that is my somewhat bizarre career history, and I'm happy to answer questions about any of that. Yeah, and maybe I should say what a developer, I'm not sure there was somebody on there that asked what a developer advocate is, but just so you kind of know what you're getting for the next hour. So a developer advocate is essentially the intersection, I think, at Google between education and technology, which kind of is what my whole career has been like. So a lot of the things that I do day to day are like looking at the documentation that goes out to developers, making YouTube videos for Google about kind of new things that are happening in Android, talking with different product teams to give kind of a developer perspective. Because I also go to a lot of tech conferences now, and I present at tech conferences and talk to developers out in the community. So there is an element where I'm going out and talking and teaching to developers, but I'm also supposed to be kind of like the eyes and ears on the ground so that when developers tell me things, I can bring that back to the product team and say, hey, developers aren't using this API because, XYZ, or they really like this, or, that we've been getting a lot of, feature requests for this, what's going on with that. So that's a little bit about my day-to-day life, at work at least.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to jump into the pre-selected questions. So they might not all flow perfectly, but at least your questions are being answered. So the first one is, tell us about your first day in the tech industry. Was it scary, hard? Were there cases where you didn't know how to accomplish the task, or you made silly mistakes?
Okay.
There was about 4 questions in there.
Yeah. All right. So I will. I don't know whether my first day in the tech industry would be like the first somewhat tech-related job that I had, which was a job off of Craigslist, working for a company called Fan Shoes, where I was kind of their all-around just tech person. I worked on the website, I worked on design, I basically picked up a lot of tasks. I think that's probably not what the question's focusing on. I would say the first time that I worked in what you would call sort of a more standard Silicon Valley tech company is my first day at Udacity. And I remember, one of the things that I remember very clearly is getting in and having my manager at the time bring me over to my desk and say, here is your new workstation. Your first task will be to set it up. And I was so petrified that I was going to like plug in the cables incorrectly, and that everyone was going to see supposedly this very adept person like not be able to turn on her computer. But I got it set up, and then they immediately had me working with Colt McCandless, who is a somewhat well-known developer advocate at Google, who's doing a lot of stuff about performance at the time. And that was like from 0 to 60, because we were immediately having a conversation about like, oh, how does this course get made? And like, I showed up yesterday, I don't know, but I'll figure that out for you. So yeah, I guess it was a little scary. I would say that for both starting at Google and starting at Udacity, basically what I did was just go around and ask whoever needed help, like who needs help? like, if you can teach me how to do this thing to help you, I will like sit down and do it. So you know that in the Udacity courses, we have, we call them widgets internally for quizzes. So whenever you get an interactive quiz. So there was another course developer who was a bit behind and needed like 30 of these done. So I'm like, just teach me how to do it, I'll do it for you. And I jumped in like that. So it was a lot of just figuring out how I could both be learning and doing something helpful while also, yeah, again, both of those things at the same time, like learning how to do my job and then also providing kind of value for the company just right off the bat.
Definitely. And at what point in your life did you decide you wanted to pursue a career in tech?
Let's see. So I think I did. So one of the things I should say is I do have a undergraduate in computer science. So to some extent, it was kind of at that point around my sophomore year. I definitely went into university knowing that maybe I would want to do something with computer science, and then really fell in love with some of the introductory classes that I have, which I think both really shaped my love of teaching because the teaching was done really well, and also, you know, obviously influenced my career. I would say that in college, I got a little bit burnt out with computer science, which is why I ended up in the Peace Corps teaching in rural Rwanda for 2 years. So I guess my experience has been, you know, initially being like, oh, maybe I want to be a video game programmer, going like, oh, maybe I actually don't want to do that because I have this conception that being a programmer is going to be me being stuck in a room and like a tiny cog in a giant machine. I'm going to go off and teach, and then kind of coming back to tech later in my life.
Someone also asked what you learned during your time in the Peace Corps.
What did I learn? Yeah, so gosh, a lot of times people will ask me, what was the Peace Corps like, which is a really difficult question because it's kind of like if anybody asked you what were the last 2 years of your life like, there's just so much stuff that happens. I will say that when I was in the Peace Corps, I had sort of hilariously little resources in some cases. And one of the things that I was able to do when, well, there was a couple of things. First of all, because I kind of worked in this environment, it was very clear that I was interested in teaching for sort of teaching's sake, and had a lot of passion surrounding that. I could really sell that when I eventually came to Udacity. So I guess I don't know if that's as much something that I learned. But another thing I learned was just to be super resourceful. I'm trying to think like, yeah, so I was teaching in Rwanda. They have a national exam. They had somebody come to the school who did like a practice national exam for the students at one point. And so I sort of secretly submitted me filling out the national exam questions so I could kind of see where like my gaps in learning were. And then when I discovered those, I like went to different computer science educators that I knew in the country and like kind of interviewed them about how to like kind of fill those gaps. Cause it was a lot of like, just culturally, they taught computer science very differently. I also, it's a little bit interesting. I think that as a I don't know how better to say this, but a white person in rural Rwanda, you stick out a lot, and there's good and bad parts of that. But one of the things is that you are sort of immediately noticed people are kind of you. I had the opportunity to kind of network with folks in the capital who were involved in kind of like the burgeoning tech scene in Rwanda. So that was really, it was one of the first times in my life where I networked to the extent that I had, you know, folks that were starting their own companies and who were involved in CS education and like in the government, and I got them all together and along with some grant money from the Peace Corps, ran a tech camp for girls. And that was a pretty like pivotal experience for me, just organizing a team of other Peace Corps volunteers. There's like 10 of us, convincing that this was something worth doing, and then kind of capitalizing on all these connections that I had formed to be able to get people to show up to panels and just help out.
That's really cool. That sounds like an awesome program. I know someone else asked, and it's kind of a similar, but what is it like to be a woman working in tech?
What is it like to be working in tech? So I think this maybe like kind of goes in line with the being sort of a different skin color in Rwanda, or being like a different gender in a room filled with you know, mostly men, which unfortunately still happens like a fair amount in companies, although I think it's getting better. I've always had kind of interests that were like I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and do a lot of nerdy stuff. So I've been around like a lot of my good friends are really geeky guys, I guess. So I think for me, it's always been a little bit easier because I don't know, there's other shared interests that I have with a lot of my coworkers and people that I hang out with. I will say, I should have probably said this at the beginning, but anything that I'm saying here is completely my own opinion. It's like nothing to do with you know, Google's like legal state in the world or anything like that. I will say that you know, Google's been in the news before about tech stuff, and occasionally I'll get like kind of not so great YouTube comments in some of my videos, to the extent that Udacity students never did. So I really love Udacity students. They tend to be a very like nice bunch of people, but the wider YouTube world is not always as kind. So I think that's like the biggest thing that's kind of stuck out to me, is kind of getting a thicker skin when it comes to that. But when I have in-person interactions and when I speak in public, I have, knock on wood, to this point had only good experiences. So
I'm still here. I'm just looking at the live questions. So we're gonna switch over to live questions now. And here we go.
All right.
Lyla, did you have an extensive portfolio of apps when you started applying for your first development jobs? Bonus. I don't know who put that in. Any interview horror stories you can share?
Yeah, okay, so extensive portfolio of apps. One of the things that I did do was I took a couple of weeks to make a personal website for myself, because I was both like, hey, this will be like, you know, sort of a resume for myself, and I could show off that like I know how to code. So I found that like a kind of fun activity. During my 2 years in the Peace Corps, I always had in my mind that I was probably gonna come back and potentially be looking for tech jobs when I came back. So I, you know, was picking things that were both helpful to my school, but also might be able to be pitched in that way. Or maybe, actually, this might be me editing a little bit after the fact. I think I also just like there was nobody around that would be able to do some of the things that I would be able to bring to the school. So that also was like actually a really big motivating factor for me, that like, hey, I can set up a content management system for this school and teach everybody how to use it. And that's a skill set that they're probably not gonna see or have anytime soon after I leave. So I wrote like some scripts for one of the things that was happening in this school was for grade report generation, they had all of the students like report cards in Microsoft Word documents, 3 different Microsoft Word documents for each grade. So like every single student's report card would be the same Microsoft Word document. And then they would like, teachers would schedule around themselves to be able to go in, open that single document, edit like the comment for the student, and put that all together. And if one teacher was like attempting to edit the document at the same time, this is like not online or anything, like a teacher could accidentally delete the whole thing, which would like, you know, was horrible for everyone. But anyway, so that was like a definite problem that I identified. And then I created I got this whole like content management system set up so that they could enter grades in like I had a local server running that was running this thing, and they could, you know, on the local server, enter their grades and comments in for students, and they could all be doing it at the same time without fear of like overwriting one another. And then that would automatically generate the reports. The old way, like somebody could accidentally delete a row in a table, or it was just, you know, it was legit just working straight on Microsoft Word documents. Anyway, so that's a long story to say, like, I managed to take things that I was currently doing and find like a computer science, or well, a programming, like a way that programming could help with that, which was both very rewarding at the time because all the teachers were like, thank you, this is great. and also, you know, obviously eventually helped when I had a little bit more to show for my portfolio when I came back. Okay, so hopefully that answers that part of the question. Interview horror stories?
Yeah.
Actually, my Udacity interview was like
stressful.
I came in at the beginning of the day, and everybody's really excited to see me. And then I did a presentation that I had done for my students in Rwanda. But the way that you teach students, that I was teaching students at least in Rwanda versus like Udacity students, was very different, partially because of just like the educational background context. So a lot of students who were in my Rwandan classroom were very used to sort of this like call response rote memorization stuff, which was actually the most struggling part of my first year of the Peace Corps, was like figure out like, oh, I have to like incorporate having them memorize definitions or like some of the learning styles that they're more interested in into the way that I'm teaching. Otherwise, just nothing's getting across. So I did this presentation about like structs and C++, and I basically just, there was a kind of like committee of people who worked at Udacity who was watching me give this presentation, and then they just like hammered on it after it was done. And basically the rest of the interview was me like trying to recover from that until I got to the last part of the interview, where I actually had an interview with Kunal, who some of you might know from the Android Basics course, and just had a really good interview on that one. So I got out not knowing what was going to happen. I mean, obviously you kind of know the ending to this story. But like one of the things that I did after it, after crying for a little bit actually, was I sat and thought about how I really wanted the job, and I sent an email saying that, like saying, you know, I just try to like make another case for myself and be like, I think I actually had a sentence in there which was like, if you give me this job, like I will put my heart and soul into it. And while that was scary, it was also very satisfying knowing that that was like a true statement. I also, I had a interview with a company in Seattle that I will not name. That was like my first tech interview ever. And I just remember in the middle of the interview, knowing that I was kind of bored by potentially the job that they were interviewing me for. So, because I was just sitting in this chair, this guy was talking with me about printer drivers, which I just remember very clearly because he seemed really excited about printer drivers. I had no desire to work on a printer driver. So it's hard to feign enthusiasm when, I don't know, that's kind of going on. So I did not get an offer for that job.
That was a good story. I'm glad it turned out well.
I'll try to answer these a little bit faster.
A couple of people have asked if you know of anyone that you work with at Google or maybe in another tech company, like commercial tech space, that had Udacity as their path to a job. 100%
yes. I know 2 folks at Google. I will say that neither of them had CS degrees beforehand, and they didn't jump straight into being a software engineer at Google. So we have a tech writing team, which is essentially like folks that write up all the documentation for Android. And I know of at least one person on the tech writing team who got the nano degree, and that was kind of like his pathway in.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then there's somebody else who also works on, I think, actually Google Scholarship related stuff related to, I don't know how they should. Kind of the thing to get from this is that if you want to kind of transition into one of these tech companies where there's a bajillion people that are trying to get software engineering jobs, you should leverage every past experience that you have. So for example, the person who was doing stuff with scholarships brought a lot of project management experience, plus the fact that they had also done the nano degree on the side. And combining those 2 together, they were able to kind of get their foot in the door. So I think there are kind of like creative ways to, I mean, that's actually my story, because like I spent 2 years teaching, and I got a job that I'm like was both more excited about than working as like a web dev at some random company, and just blended the things that I was actually like interested and passionate about a lot better. So you know, I took the fact that I was teaching and ended up in a company where I essentially got to write like scripts for little educational movies all day. And that was fun. So hopefully it was fun for some of you too.
Yeah, that's great. This is a more practical question.
Okay.
From Stephen Penn.
Hey, Stephen.
Do you ever get screen fatigue, and how do you deal with it?
So I don't. I do have what's it called, like Flux and some of the programs on different machines that I have that change there's programs that you can do that basically like change the light setting on your computer so that it's emitting less blue light, and that helps with sleep because the blue light will keep you up at night if your screen is producing this. I think it's also like a little bit easier on the eyes. But I also I'm in a lot of meetings because I work with product teams and I work with engineers, and I'm like kind of at the intersection of a bunch of different teams. I do stuff like this although I'm staring at a screen. You know, I had to have a nice 15-minute walk to get over to the Udacity office. So, you know, I get a little bit outside then. I also am pretty religious about taking lunch with my teammates. So I think just like building those periods of time in your day to get away from the computer are pretty important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think that can relate to a lot of fields. I mean, now you're on your computer all the time at work. So anything you can do to find a break is good. Picking the best one.
Okay.
What do you see yourself doing in the next 5 years?
Oh gosh. What do I see myself doing in the next 5 years?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, I feel like if I was getting ready for interviews, I would have a very good answer for that. I am so hyper-focused. So it's I just had my 1-year anniversary at Google last week.
Wow.
Yeah,
Congrats.
and I've learned a lot. This is joining Google is definitely a job where I'm just incredibly lucky because there is so much to learn, and I have a lot of people around me. Like I'm coming in as a more junior member, which if you get the opportunity to do that, that's amazing because that means you have a bunch of people like around you that you can learn from. So I'm just kind of focusing on being a sponge and getting everything out from this experience that I have right now. So I do not have a 5-year plan,
That's
as it
the
were.
place you would be in professionally.
I think that I need to kind of just see what, I don't know, as I'm here longer, what that feels like, and that'll inform more about what my next move is going to be.
All right.
Yeah.
Next question. How do you best prepare for a technical interview? Are the interviewers more lenient with newer developers?
So I actually recently was in a interview training for how to be an interview for Google. So hopefully I can share a little bit of light about this. Yeah. So the question was like how best to prepare for it. Okay. Well, so let me tell you about my preparation process, which got me a job offer at I got job offers at Google and Facebook and a couple other companies around the Bay. So I started off a couple months before I was applying on the kind of like coding sites. I'm like having a brain fart about which exact one I was doing, but it was it had hack in the name. But it's essentially one of those sites where it'll give you like a word or a problem like you might get asked in a programming interview, and then you type in your solution in any language that you want, and it'll run a bunch of tests against it to make sure that you not only gave a solution that works, but that you gave a solution that is the most optimal. And there was actually, on this particular platform, there's actually a series of questions focused around the book. Oh my gosh, I'm just like, the book that everybody reads that is very thick and about coding interview questions, and you are not a
That's not something I'm gonna know.
Can I like use my computer right
yes.
now? All right, you were seeing So probably one of the other students on there knows this.
You're probably saying
Cracking the code.
Yeah, cracking the coding interview. Right. Gail, what's her face? Yeah. So cracking the coding interview. Yeah, there's like 6 editions of it. It's like the Bible for code interview stuff. So there were a series of questions about like focused around problems in cracking the code interview. There's like 10 of them. I made sure to go over all the data structures that I'd learned about in school, but I guess that list of questions was helpful because it had those out there. So if you did go to school and take a data structures and algorithms class, you will like get a kind of list of like data structures that you should be aware of. So things like a heap or a linked list or, like binary search trees, that kind of stuff. And I did questions that forced me to code those from scratch. In an interview, you probably will not get asked to code one of those from scratch because generally those questions, like the things that I was writing these little programs for were more complex than anything that you get asked in an interview, but you might get asked a question that requires you to use one of these data structures. So if you make it, you really know how it works. So I did that because I actually, maybe sort of masochistically find that kind of fun. I've always liked little programming, like kind of quizzes, and I don't know. So I enjoy that. Okay, so then step 2, after you're feeling pretty good about that, is you find a friend. It helps a little bit if they are a programmer or know that, but honestly, you could find anybody and you have them take your cracking the coding interview book or some other resource that you have, open up to a random page and ask you a question. And then either you have a sheet of paper or you order yourself a whiteboard and you talk out loud and you do practice interviews with them. And you do as many of those as you could arm twist your friend into helping you with. Part of it is just being like comfortable verbalizing what's going on in your brain. I can tell you from the other side of going to this, like, how do you be a good Google interviewer? Like, we are looking for folks who are able to communicate what their thoughts are. Interview is hard. You have to be like communicating really well what your thoughts are, like most likely solving this problem like you never seen before, pulling all of this like years of knowledge like you've or months of knowledge, depending on how long you've been studying computer science, crammed into your head out, and sort of like performing in that way. So you should practice it because it is different than sitting at a computer and just typing things in.
Is there any lenience for someone applying that's new to?
Oh yeah. So yes, I would say that like just specifically focusing on Google. So Google has like a leveling system where it's like level 1 to 10, and essentially you eventually you ascend beyond levels and become like a director that doesn't have like a number associated with them. But I guess the one thing I'll say, and I think that other large companies do something similar to this, where you might have like a numerical number, and generally when you apply, you are coming in at a particular level position. So like level 3 is what most intro level like programmers will come in as. And the expectations for them are less than if you're coming in at like a level 5, which usually means that you've been like an senior architect of programs at like another place before coming in. Of course, there are salaries associated with those different ranges. So if you have a ton of experience, obviously you want to try to be coming at the highest level that you can.
That makes sense.
I will say, okay, so this is for like a really large company. Things are different at startups. One of the potentially nice things about a large company is that they have more thought out ways to mentor. They actually have a crop of folks who just graduated from college that are coming in. So they have all these systems for getting people up to speed, and they're used to mentoring new people.
Could you repeat the name of the site with the mock coding problems?
Yeah,
or
I never said it. I just kind of like had a. Yeah, I think probably what makes the most sense is that instead of me doing this right now, I'll send it to Kelsey.
Yeah, we'll share it.
Yeah, it's probably been shared here before. Interview Cake was also a site that I started using at the end that I really liked. and one of the helpful things about that is it like really walks you through the mental process that you should be going through to solve problems. So it'll get you to the easiest solution, or you will usually get the easiest solution first, and then it will ask you some question like, did you consider this? Or can you think of a way to, like, does your program run with this level of efficiency? Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move back to pre-selected questions. And we're probably a little off on our time. Oh no, we're doing good, we're doing good. Okay, so I am a career changer.
Okay.
How does the younger crowd accept people like me at your job? Or do you have any tips for someone who's coming in as a career changer?
So I think I kind of said the biggest insight that I would give, which is, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but like, do not be afraid of your past experience and figure out some way to sell it. And practice that. Practice like saying that to somebody before you end up in an interview. Another thing that you might want to do is, I know that I applied to places that I was less interested in first, so that hopefully I would get a like phone or on-site interviews, and I'd get used to talking about myself and kind of get a sense for how people responded prior to you know, showing up with my dream job. So that might also be something that you consider doing. But if not that, like definitely make sure that you kind of have your self-sales pitch and it incorporates your history, and to not be like afraid or ashamed of your history and your story.
Kind of going along with that, and a couple of people asked this, but is a bachelor's degree necessary to have a career?
I mean, I feel like the whole reason that Udacity exists is like a testament to how that is not the case. The whole reason that boot camps exist and that kind of stuff. Two of my roommates right now are boot camp graduates, one from a data science boot camp, another from a design boot camp. So neither of them studied those things, and they have careers there. And I would say that the crowd for like Udacity style programs and boot camp programs is larger than those two like subfields. On the other end of things, like so if I had joined Facebook, one of the people that I was going to be working with was a boot camp grad who, you know, was like a mid to senior level engineer, an Android engineer. Like I said, there's a coworker of mine who's a tech writer right now that like did not have a formal CS degree. It is definitely harder because there's a, you know, for better or for worse, there's a funnel from you know, high performing CS programs into these companies, and they kind of know about these things, but there are definitely there's definitely a proportion of people that come from non-CS backgrounds.
How often do you run into a situation where you need to ask or search for help?
All the time. I'm being helped right now. Like, I just forgot the name of that website that I used for like 3 months, and I was asking and searching for help. One of you guys helped me with the coding interview book. So yeah, I think that asking for help and imposter syndrome are so inextricably like wrapped up with one another. And I think that one of the things that has helped me back, I know at Google especially, because it's, well, okay. Have other people like had long rants about imposter syndrome on?
No, actually, no.
Oh, really? Okay, because I feel like, all right, well, I apologize to anybody who's like already heard this or knows about this. So imposter syndrome is this syndrome or idea that you might get when you're going into a situation that's particularly challenging, or maybe you don't feel like you have the expected background, that you are an imposter, and that you somehow like cheated or scammed your way into the position that you're in. And someday, maybe it's tomorrow, everybody's going to find out that you're not actually as smart or legitimate or whatever it is to be where you are. For the Noogler training at Google, they have like a 30-minute session about imposter syndrome, because it's something like, you know, 30% of people in the room are like currently experiencing it. And I can say that like I have definitely experienced that as well. So Anyways, asking for help. So one of the ways that negatively affects you, and I have let this affect me before, but I try not to make it the case, is you'll sit there going like, I should already know this. So I'm going to spend like 5 hours trying to figure it out instead of asking someone for help. Sometimes that's good, but a lot of times, like if it's something that somebody could have solved for you within 2 minutes, and then you just wasted 5 hours, you are both hurting yourself and the place that you're at. So if you're in an environment where people are being nasty to you because you're asking questions, like it's not you, that's probably the environment. Like asking questions, wanting to learn. Yeah, I mean, so one of the best experiences I've actually had at Google is so every year the developer relations team puts out this app called IO Sketch, which is a Android, iOS, and web app for their yearly IO conference. So you can like sign up for different talks like you might want to go to this app. So the Android team, which I'm on with the developer relations, was making this app, and I managed to talk to the tech lead for that and find somebody who could pair program with me, and that was like an incredibly awesome experience. So pair programming, for people who don't know what that is when you have two developers that are either at the same computer or at two computers that are kind of like hooked up to one another, and there's one person who is programming, and there's another person that is reviewing everything that you write, and you're like kind of talking out loud and working through problems as you go. And I guess just with the question asking thing, that's like constantly asking questions and having a conversation. And I think that like I probably learned the most about Kotlin, which is like a new thing that I'm picking up, and I shared my knowledge about architecture components, and it was like just a very positive experience. So I don't know, have that in the back of your mind. Some companies do that for onboarding, or like I know one of the companies I applied for called Pivotal, like that's their whole model, is that every single thing that a person produces is like pair programmed by two people. But yeah, asking questions, good. Imposter syndrome, bad.
Yeah. I think this is kind of in the same vein, but you know, everyone who's listening right now is kind of in a different place. So how do you know when you're qualified to start a job or to start applying for jobs?
That's a tricky one. I would say, so one of the handy things you could do is if you have a LinkedIn and you've connected with a lot of people, you could get a hold of somebody that is working in the tech industry and show them your resume. And that might be the, it's hard for me to be like, yes, you know, are ready without knowing specifically about what your background is. I would say that there's a difference in being ready to be a software engineer at Google, even between like software engineering level 3 versus like the level 5 thing that I was talking about, versus, you know, potentially being ready to come in for a tech writing career at Google versus other things. So it really, yeah, it
depends.
Yeah, I guess it's not. I will say that historically, or like science will say that women tend to underrate themselves on this and wait a lot longer. They tend to want to check off all the check boxes for, you know, if a job description says that you need these 10 things, they want to make sure that they know those 10 things. Whereas other groups might go in, you know, if they know 60 or 70% of it, they'll still apply for the job. For Udacity, when I applied for that job, I had done something related to each of the things that they asked for, but it was definitely a little bit of a risk that I took. So I don't know. Don't be afraid to take risks. You know, if maybe, you know, talk it over with somebody so you make sure you're not doing something too crazy.
Yeah.
Going back to the tech interview question, there's like another one on here that's kind of the same, but yeah, you definitely have to like be ready to do well in a coding interview, like put some time into specifically practicing that skill. It is like a test. You should study for tests, and yeah, it is like a test. So it's not a just a rating of your like fixed intelligence or some gifts that you were born with. It is a thing that you can train for and people get better at, and it's actually something that you could usually get better at pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's helpful. If a new member was to join your team, what trait do you most wish they had, including personality, soft skills, hard skills, etc.?
Okay, so my team specifically is like the developer advocate team. So I would say empathy. Yeah. I mean, you have to be empathetic with the users, or like the folks out of the world that are going to be using kind of learning materials that you make. You have to be empathetic with engineers that really love their product and might not have the opportunity to go out and talk to particular people. I just work with so many different types of people that I think empathy.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
What are typical mistakes you will make and shouldn't feel bad about when starting in tech?
I think one of them is like not asking questions soon enough. I don't know if I know like a lot of people where it's the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I try to get better at is I've had some people who, when they started a company, have had like good things come of scheduling one-on-ones with like different teams that they're related to. So a one-on-one is when you'll just meet somebody or like chat them on Slack or Hangouts and go, hey, would you mind sitting down for 30 minutes to chat with me about what you do and kind of how your job fits in like the larger range of things. So I think that that is something that can be super helpful and generally reflects on you, because there's a couple things going on. First of all, that person now knows who you are. They're usually like fairly impressed, like you've reached out to them. You know a little bit more how the internal workings of the company are. If you ever have questions about anything, you know who to go to. Again, with the question thing, like it is often so much faster to just like ping somebody, send them a little chat and be like, hey, do you know how this works? Or could you send me one of the questions that I ask a lot is, can you send me a document that explains this?
Yeah.
Because that's a really easy ask. And you should not spend a huge amount of time looking for a document.
That's smart. That makes sense. It's not a heavy lift on their end.
Yeah, it's not a heavy lift on their end. And then, you can spend 20 minutes reading over this document and hopefully know more about what's up.
All right. We're going to live questions.
All right, we're going live.
All right. I'm working on it.
The weird one.
I'm gonna go for it.
Okay.
Is pseudocode good enough in a technical interview, or is it necessary to use specific and exact Java, C++, etc. language? You need to know a language, but nobody is going, well, I won't say nobody, but it's sort of like a bad sign if a company's going to be like super upset if you forgot to put like a semicolon at the end of your code. So I guess one of the things in this sort of interview training for Google that was mentioned was like, people expect that you will have a computer with you when you're actually doing your day-to-day job. So if you forget, like, you don't have to be like a dictionary and know, or the Java docs and know like the exact name for every single data structure that is out there. You don't. There's no use necessarily in memorizing that. You do have to be like, I know a method like this exists. I know that this is generally how it works, and these are the implications that it has for like how long it's going to take and how much storage it's going to take up. But memorizing the exact name, like that type of stuff, isn't as important. But I mean, and it also depends on what you are applying for and what level you're applying for. A lot of companies, I believe Google being one of them, especially for like intro-level positions, will hire generalists. Like they're just looking for somebody who can pick up stuff quickly. They want to know that you know one language well, but it doesn't really matter which language. But if you were joining some 10-person startup where you're the like third engineer and they do everything in Rails, like you have to know Rails, and they will probably ask you to code in Ruby. Yeah, you just be cognizant. And if they have very like clear specifications about like what they work in, like it is perfectly valid that they might ask you some kind of tricky question that's related to like the C programming language. All right, I'm crafting up I've got the next
one. Can I say something? I'll say something to the last question too. So another thing that you might get sometimes are like they want to see that you can talk like comparatively about different ways to implement things or potentially different programming languages. So that's like having an opinion about how to do something and why you would make a decision one way or another is often like a skill that they'll sometimes look for. So, you know, beyond being able to spit out like, this is what a relational database is, and this is what a NoSQL database is, usually in an interview, if they need you to have skills surrounding that, like they will want you to be able to talk about why you might pick one versus the other for a particular situation and have strong opinions about why one is better than the other. Same thing for like being aware of different libraries that developers might use in the community and stuff like that.
All right, next question.
Mm-hmm.
In most Google/tech jobs, I've seen bachelor's in computer science as a minimum requirement or 2 years of development experience. So how can a career switcher apply to any Google dev jobs, or can we not?
You can never, I don't think there's anything that ever like stops you from submitting the resume. I will say that like, one of the ways that you can potentially help yourself with that, which probably somebody who's already brought up here, is if you have a LinkedIn profile and you're interested in a particular company, you can usually do a search to find out like connections that you have in that company and potentially get a referral. A referral might allow you to jump. So having something like I have a CS degree is a signifier that might get you through a beginning hoop to a phone interview like that, or phone screen. Like that's essentially what you're trying to get with that, is like somebody will talk to me. If you have a referral from that company, that could help. So if you want a quick fix, that might be something that you could do like a day, is find somebody who will give you a referral somewhere that knows you well enough and what you've done. And I mean, besides that, like, yeah, you need to find creative ways to get work experience, I would say, or apply to jobs where like maybe the job is a job at a fintech company, financial technology company, and you have like a background in accounting. There might be some way that you can spin the fact that you have this other skill set where, you know, maybe you don't have 2 years work experience as a programmer, but you bring a lot more to the table because you have this like particular skill set that is super high in another area. Yeah.
This is, you're touching on this, but I'll ask it anyway.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions for bridge jobs for aspiring developers who are still developing their skills?
Yeah, I mean, my bridge job was the Peace Corps. I don't know if I would. Well, I mean, like, honestly, you know, as a, even with my fancy CS degree, like, I didn't like magically get a job, but that was also because I did a very like limp-wristed attempt to get a job. I did, I mean, I went on like Craigslist and worked for a company that didn't pay me very much. And I don't really know if that's like appropriate. I don't know. I do think it like did help my resume somewhat. Gosh, so like, yeah, I mean, like you can, I would say keep coding is one thing. If there is a pet project that you're passionate about and can put some time into, like having a GitHub. So another thing, again, I don't know how much this has been said, but if you are looking for programming jobs, another signal that looks good to folks is having a GitHub repository that is that shows that like every day you're doing a little bit of programming. And even if it's stuff that you're not super proud of, or, you know, isn't revolutionary, the fact that it's showing that like you do this on a daily basis could be a really good positive signifier for recruiters. Along with that, GitHub has like a starring system and some other like following mechanics. And if you do happen to make some library or something that a lot of people use, that can be helpful. Kind of along with the networking thing. I don't know how many folks out there are necessarily Android folks, but Google has Google developer groups. Developer groups are stretch farther than Android, but meetups and like basically any programming language that you can think of has meetups and things if you're in a larger city. So I know that's not going to be everybody out there, but getting connected to those communities and meeting people there and doing a little bit of in-person networking is good.
All right. What do you recommend to do to really get a foothold on JavaScript where one can really flow with it?
JavaScript.
Yes.
Switch to Kotlin. No, yeah. I am not a JavaScript developer. I know that we do have some courses on Udacity, but I don't want to like get. I don't.
Totally fine.
Yeah.
Right, next slide.
Yeah, I'm sure there are JavaScript. If you're in a bigger city, there are like JavaScript meetups, and I would go to meetup and ask somebody there that question.
How do you bring up mistakes or bad news to your manager?
How do you bring up mistakes or bad news to your manager? I mean, probably the sooner the better. So, yeah, I mean, okay. If you're on a team and at a company that's functioning well, everybody should be on the same side. It's kind of like how I see it. So if you're ever feeling like you and your manager are on different teams or have different goals, like that's a problematic situation to be in, and definitely probably something to flag to somebody, whether it's talking about with your friends and then figuring out who else to reach out to. But yeah, that's sort of problematic. So I'm lucky that my managers have been great. I've definitely like come and said that things are late. If you made a mistake or you're late with something and somebody's really upset at you, or like that could show like a lack of trust in your ability maybe to get things done, which is also like another bad thing. But generally, like again, this might be like so if you're sitting there going like really afraid of telling somebody that you made a mistake, that might be another telltale symptom of imposter syndrome. Because if everything is functioning well, like you're supposed to be there, that you and your manager are both trying to get the same stuff done, like so the conversation should be more like, hey, here's the situation right now. We're being reflective about it, and our focus is really like, how can we resolve this and not a blame placing thing. If you're in a company that's like really focused on placing blame on people, that's also probably not a particularly healthy environment to be in. I know when I've been in more leadership-y sort of like project lead positions, I have done retrospectives, which is, even regardless of whether the project went well or went poorly, it is getting everybody together in a room and having like a frank discussion about where we think we did really well and where we think we didn't do very well. And then the next step on top of like, where did we not do so well, is how can we do better next time? So I think it's always focused on like, how can I improve this thing? How can I do better? Like that should be seen as a good thing where you're asking for feedback. Another tip for people that want to apply to Google, one of the written down characteristics of Googliness is the ability to accept feedback. So Googliness. Yeah. All right. Well, there's audaciousness or whatever.
True,
yeah. I'm just brimming with audaciousness and Googliness, but yeah, like that's actually one of the like checkboxes that reviewers are looking for, or examples of you asking for feedback, being open to feedback, being able to take feedback. So, if you go in and say, hey, give me this feedback on this mistake that I made, and then you go to your Google interview, you can talk about how that went down, and hopefully it went down really well. Yeah.
All right, we are now at 5:10, and we have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask our final question.
Okay.
If you had to narrow down all the advice for beginner programmers to one important tip, what would it be and why? Speaking of really
narrow down, if I have to provide one golden nugget of wisdom. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the biggest thing that just comes through my mind is to kind of like believe in yourself, because it's, I mean, especially if you're doing a career switch, I feel like it can be very daunting. I know I felt that way when I was coming back from the Peace Corps. Like, is anybody going to want me? Is this like, did I just do something crazy and throw my whole career away? I guess also with that is just, sitting and taking some time to really meditate on like why you are doing the things that you're doing, and having your own story about why you want a particular job or you're making this particular switch, and like knowing deep in your heart that that is like a truthful story. Because when you have that, you can do things like what I did when I applied for Udacity, and after I didn't have like the best start for my interview, at the end of it, I sent out that email going like, I will work my butt off for you guys if you take me. And you can do that with earnestness and I think a sincerity that people can see. So obviously that's not going to work in all cases, and you know, it's not like some magic pill to get accepted everywhere. But I think knowing what you're doing is the right thing, and kind of just knowing your own personal narrative and how that fits into that, it'll convince you, and it'll keep you going, and it will convince employers too. I think that can see that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good advice. Thanks everyone for coming today.
Thank you.
We thank you, Lyla, for being here. This was really awesome. It was really informative for me, and I'm sure everyone who's live. All right, have a great rest of your Monday.
Cool. Have a good Monday. Bye, everyone.